great to see so many people here today for what is a very special and, as it turns out, extremely timely lunch on exposing corruption in the corporate sector. In fact, I reckon there are so many whistleblowers here today, it's going to be a bit like the MCG on a Saturday afternoon. It is timely because we are seeing the continuing global fallout of the leaking of the Panama Papers, which is having a big impact on harming corporations, dodgy corporations, and damaging reputations, not just here in Australia, but right around the world. And of course, here in Australia, debate continues about the setting up or otherwise of a Royal Commission into the banking sector. That debate largely driven by the fantastic revelations of our moderator today, Adele Ferguson, about wrongdoings in some of our major banks. After lunch, we'll hear from Adele and our special guest. She'll more formally introduce them, but I want to flag them now. Jeff Morris is a former Commonwealth Bank employee who, of course, as many of you would know now, blew the whistle on what was going on at his bank, which fed into Adele's reports. Michael Fraser is a very active consumer advocate who helped highlight the plight, the ruthless exploitation of workers at the 7-Eleven convenience chain, and has led to some wide-ranging and hopefully sustainable and long-lasting changes at that company. Michael, great to see you. And Alan Fells, the man who for many years was the bête noire of corporate Australia in his role as the chairman of the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission. He also led the internal inquiry by 7-Eleven into the wages scandal. Our moderator today is one of Australia's best known and most influential business columnists. She, of course, is Adele Ferguson, who only last year was named the Graham Perkin Australian Journalist of the Year at the Melbourne Quill Awards. On the very same night, she took out the Gold Quill. In 2014, she won the Gold Walkley for her exposing of wrongdoings within the corporate sector. In fact, Adele, I think the only gong you haven't won is the Gold Logie. You've got to work on that.
I'd like to thank the Melbourne Press Club for hosting the event, and also like to thank the panellists for coming along today to talk about a hugely important topic, whistleblowers. It's one of the most important issues for the media, corporate Australia and politics, because over the past few decades, some of the biggest scandals would never have come to light without the courage of whistleblowers. Sometimes they're anonymous, such as Deep Throat and Watergate. Sometimes it's a package of documents in a brown paper bag that suddenly appear in the mail. And other times it's off-the-record conversations using the confidentiality protection. In Australia, we've had a suite of whistleblowers over the past few years who've helped expose scandals such as the Reserve Bank securrency, bribery and corruption by some of our high-profile companies. The most notable is the recent Unaoil scandal, which embroiled Leighton. We've had the Panama Papers, wage exploitation at 7-Eleven, and the various financial scandals. They've all helped bring us to the point of a debate about whether or not we should have a Royal Commission into banking. One of the most famous whistleblowers is Jeff Morris, who blew the whistle on CBA's financial planning scandal in 2009, firstly going to our corporate regulator ASIC, and he'll tell you what happened there. For me, I've worked with many different whistleblowers during my career, and without them, we would not know about misconduct inside CBA, NAB, IOOF, 7-Eleven, and most recently CBA again with CommonSure. And that was probably one of the most egregious of all, which was exposed thanks to Dr. Benjamin Coe, the Chief Medical Officer. Some of the topics I would like to discuss today include the personal impact on whistleblowers, whether we're doing enough to protect them, and should the right of a whistleblower be improved with legislation. In the US, there's a reward system of up to 30% of proceeds if a whistleblower goes to the SEC. Given most either end up losing their job or become the subject of smear campaigns, is that something we should have here? So on that note, I would like to thank each panellist to talk to us for a few minutes, and firstly kicking off with Jeff Morris.
Well, thanks Adele. My story goes back to 2008, so that's a lot of ground to cover. Back then I was a financial planner at CBA looking for a quiet life. and there was another financial planner there by the name of Don Newen who'd been suspended. An elderly couple came in to see me one day and they were physically distressed because $500,000 of their money had been vaporised and they couldn't get an explanation out of anybody at CBA. I realised very shortly afterwards that the customer experience people at CBA, whose job was to help these customers, were lying to them and trying to cover it up. And a clear-cut case for compensation, in my view, was going to be denied. At the same time, I saw the files of this financial planner being sanitised. The next thing that happened was Don Newen came back from suspension and was promoted and was turned loose to try and hose down these victims. There was a management conspiracy to cover this up. So there were a couple of other planners who'd seen people in the same situation I had. In the typical Australian way, we had a meeting in the pub to come up with a plan of action, and we decided to write to ASIC. There wasn't much point, we thought, going internally because it seemed like pretty much the entire management team was in on the cover-up. Now, even at that stage, this is September 2008, one of my colleagues said to me, "But mate, that's no good, ASIC is useless. Everybody knows that." And I said, "Well, maybe they are. We'll just have to shame them into doing their job. And if need be, we'll go to the media to force them to do their job." Famous last words. So we sent a report to ASIC in October 2006. It was about 6 pages long. It's still available on the Senate Inquiry website as part of one of my submissions. And in that we spelt everything out. What we found was that trying to get ASIC to act on this was literally like flogging a dead horse. So after about 8 or 9 months of it being moved from department to department at ASIC, and we're looking at it, watching the files being sanitised and the clients being lied to, we decided we'd better do something to give ASIC a bit of a G-up, so we leaked it to trade press, a small article in the trade press. Well, we didn't get ASIC's attention, because it takes a lot to do that, but of course CBA, it was like a bomb going off there. The next thing you know, Don Newen had resigned, and CBA had even voluntarily put their hands up and sent a breach report to ASIC. This is after 8 or 9 months of trying to cover it up. Anyway, the management knew who'd leaked that stuff, so I thought in for a penny, in for a pound. And I sent a memo to the top 3 executives at CBA. Again, pretty much covering what we'd sent to ASIC. 2 of them were executive directors on the board of CBA. This is June 2009. And at the same time, I marched into CBA Group Security and laid the whole thing out in front of them. Well, I think that had something to do with Don Newen getting sacked in the breach report to ASIC. But the cover-up continued, the clients kept getting lied to, and the files were still being sanitised. At this stage, we're thinking, well, surely ASIC's got to turn up soon. Anyway, another 8 or 9 months went by. February 2010, we couldn't take it anymore. We physically marched into ASIC and literally pounded the table and said, "You've got to do something about this." And a couple of weeks later, ASIC finally served a notice to get the files, which we'd asked them to do 18 months earlier. So they'd had 18 months to clean these files up before ASIC ever saw them. ASIC then, it took them nearly 2 years. By late 2011, October 2011 by now, ASIC had imposed what they call an enforceable undertaking on CBA, and that's kind of a gentleman's agreement that they'll stop being bad boys. And ASIC had put in place this kind of compensation scheme that looked all right on paper, but the big problem was CBA was left alone to implement it. So the clients were still getting fobbed off. The clients who'd lost $500,000, who were getting offered nothing initially, were now getting offered like $5,000 to go away. So I watched that going on for a bit longer. In February 2013, I left CBA, and I might say ASIC did absolutely nothing to help me. Before I left, I tried to meet with the CEO. there wasn't any interest in, they knew who I was, there wasn't any interest in me meeting with the CEO. Because I think a lot of the time, people don't want to know the things you're going to tell them. I left CBA though with a goal, and that was to get a parliamentary inquiry into what had gone on and ASIC's incompetence, because, and I'm sure you all realise this, most royal commissions come out of a parliamentary inquiry. Fortunately, I fell in with a journalist called Adele Ferguson, who started to run like an avalanche of stories in June 2013. And a couple of weeks later, a national senator called John Wacker Williams, got up, called for a Senate inquiry, and he got a unanimous vote in the Senate. And at that stage, after the inquiry was called, I wrote a letter to the chair of CBA, and I said, look, I don't think you guys are getting the full story. I will come in and give you and the board a briefing. This is at the start of a parliamentary inquiry. But no, the letter came back, no thank you. You know, imagine the things that I could have told them that they presumably didn't want to hear. Well, that inquiry ran for nearly a year. In May 2014, they put out a 547-page Senate report. It was an inquiry into ASIC, and here's the significant thing. There were over 500 submissions to that inquiry. It was a record for a parliamentary inquiry. And pretty much every one of them was highly critical of ASIC for having let people down in one way or another. Now, the committee themselves said, quite frankly, we really only had time to look at a few of these submissions. And just park that thought for later, because imagine what a Royal Commission could do with those hundreds of submissions that the parliamentary inquiry simply don't have the time and resources to deal with. But by the end of the Senate inquiry, CBA's story and ASIC's story had completely fallen apart, and the CBA compensation scheme was exposed for the utter fraud it was, and it was also evident that ASIC had done nothing to supervise that scheme being implemented fairly. So the customers were just left to the tender mercies of CBA. Now, there was a recommendation for a Royal Commission into CBA coming out of that voluminous Senate report, and they said specifically, we don't make this recommendation lightly. But that's a group of senators who'd weighed the evidence and come to that conclusion. Now, pretty much the moment it hit the airwaves, Matthias Cormann, the Finance Minister, was saying, well, there won't be a Royal Commission. And then after a few hours, he got his talking points right and said, well, I have to consider the matter yet, but there probably won't be a Royal Commission. I actually drove to Canberra to see Matthias Cormann, and I implored him not to let the bank off, at least not to let them off the Royal Commission until they'd at least paid the customers. Well, yet again, we have another compensation scheme being overseen by CBA. Matthias Cormann announced that there'd be no Royal Commission. I think it was about 2 weeks before the CBA AGM, so that worked out well for them. And so CBA is running another compensation scheme. At this stage, I had one meeting with Ian Narev, and I offered to help him. And of course, needless to say, my help was not required. I mean, what would I have to offer? What would I know? More recently, of course, we've had the ComInsure scandal, and I would just make the point that one successful claimant at ComInsure that I'm aware of is that financial planner, Don Newen, who resigned from CBA, that was the fellow I reported to ASIC, who's been banned for 7 years. Well, he's actually managed to successfully claim on ComInsure for an income protection policy for the last 7 years. So he's done all right. Now, I'll just quickly end by saying where we are today and why this Royal Commission is needed. As I said, there's one of the arguments is that we've had these inquiries, but the fact is, I've been to several Senate inquiries now. They're run on a shoestring. They have no resources. As I said, they didn't even get to look at most of those 500 submissions. There's a treasure trove of information there. I put in 8 or 9 submissions myself. They didn't even get to look at all of mine. Now, and the fact is, what this would be investigating essentially are all of these past failures by ASIC where they've let people down. So it's a fairly ludicrous proposition to suggest that ASIC should investigate the past failures of ASIC. It's a bit like expecting Caesar to investigate Caesar. So And some other things have been said about ASIC, about their funding being cut. Well, of course, this was long before their funding was cut. And I would say that funding alone can't fix a rotten culture. And there is a rotten culture at ASIC, just as there is at some of the banks. And what's required to fix that is comprehensive new leadership. What a Royal Commission would also do is pierce the veil of fake contrition that so many of these corporations can hide behind. And it would expose these self-administered compensation schemes for the frauds they are. I said to Matthias Cormann, don't trust them. ASIC trusted CBA and they made monkeys out of them. If you trust them, they'll make a monkey out of you. And if you look at the stats for how many people have been paid in that CBA compensation scheme in the last 2 years, you'll see what I mean. So it would also provide a means to hold the managers and also, very importantly, the boards of these public companies to account. The board of CBA comprehensively failed in this. Victims wrote to them back in 2010, not interested. But most importantly, I've seen too many victims now in too many scandals. It's not just CBA and CommonSure, there's terrible agribusiness ones, the Timber Corps, the Great Southerns, and there are tens, if not hundreds of thousands of these victims who've got no voice and got no justice. And most of all, I think the Royal Commission is for them to be listened to. Thank you.
Next, I'd like to introduce you to Michael Fraser, who caused some controversy in the AFR this week in a gossip column with the headline, "Stalker Michael Fraser, Press Club Lunch Star." It said there's no way Fraser should get to share a stage with Ferguson and Fells on Thursday and backslap them for all the wrongdoings they've righted together. Indeed, the MPC ought to take Fraser off the panel. The column did mention that CBA had hired spying firm G4S to spy on Fraser. The problem for CBA was when they spied on him, they also inadvertently spied on a number of politicians and lawyers. Why were they so interested in Michael? Because they knew he was dealing with CBA whistleblowers. So on that note, I'd like to thank Michael for taking time out and his contribution to exposing the wage fraud at 7-Eleven.
Thanks to the Melbourne Press Club and Adele. There was a couple of things that probably weren't too true in that article, and maybe a few more that weren't so true, but my lawyers said I really shouldn't say too much about that, and we're looking at contesting various things further, but I think it's important that the banks don't go unchecked, and people like Jeff Morris are doing great work, and Adele Ferguson, and that must continue. Getting on to 7-Eleven, I first met Adele through the Commonwealth Bank spying on me, and she ran a story that was quite widely published, and as a result, when I started, I moved in 2012 to the Gold Coast, and I was right next door to a 7-Eleven, and I would frequent that store, and I'm a bit of a chatty fellow, and I made friends with everyone in the store. And one guy in particular was Sam Pendham. And Sam had 3 degrees, and he was always there. And I thought, this guy must be loaded. He's here on the weekends, he's here in the mornings, nights, whenever. He's always there. So I'd start joking with him and saying, Sam, you must have a lot of money. And he said to me, no, I get $12 an hour flat rate. And I was sort of outraged. I didn't know what he should be getting, and I wanted to look further into the employer, and he said to me, Michael, no, it's not my employer, they all do it, that's the 7-Eleven way. And I thought, no, that can't be possible, so I started going around to stores, and I eventually went to 3 states and to 60 stores, and what I did encounter was a large amount of intimidation and threatening, bullying behaviour, and staff very, very scared to even speak about their position. And sometimes I had to go to a store 40 times just to get one person to admit to me what their pay conditions were. But it very quickly started adding up that I couldn't actually find anyone that was being paid correctly. So I was sort of putting questions to head office, thinking that they would really want to know this. And the basic message that I got time and time again from head office through their PR people was, the CEO won't be available to talk, and we're not interested in what you've got to say. If an employee's got a problem, they should go take it up with Fair Work. And I said, well, these people don't even know what Fair Work is. They call it the fair tradings or the fair workings. They don't even know what it is. And I said, surely if it was one store, or maybe 2 stores, or maybe even 2 states, but when there's a Chinese owner in Melbourne and an Indian owner in Queensland and a Pakistani owner in Sydney, and they're all exploiting people, and that's happening in quite a number of stores, surely that might be the franchisor's responsibility and not the employee's responsibility. And I said, so it appears to be systemic. So I started writing to the CEO, who never responded. And basically I rang them up. I said, listen, I've got all the evidence. I'll give you all the proof that there's mass underpayment in the stores. And they told me on the phone, do not send it to us. We do not want it. It's not our problem. Tell them to go to Fair Work. So then they responded through their lawyers, Slater and Gordon. And I was quite surprised by that. And they initially offered to help assist with some claims going to Fair Work. And I wrote back and I said, thank you for your offer to assist. And they wrote back and said, no, we're making it clear we're not going to assist. And they didn't want any involvement further. So basically we saw systemic underpayment across the stores. And I spoke to many hundreds of workers over a period of time. And it was the most egregious situation, staff buying visas, staff working for as little as $3 an hour, and it was a terrible situation. So I felt at that point, if the company wouldn't engage with me in all the emails that I wrote to them, and they were disinterested, then media was an option. And that's when I sent Adele Ferguson a text, and I said, are you interested in this? And obviously Adele's got a pretty high standard as to what would be considered to be something worthy of an investigation. So I started talking with her, and Adele started doing a lot of work, much more than I felt that I'd done. She just really did a lot of work and ramped it up to a whole other level. And a whistleblower came forward, and that was a very integral part of this process. If it wasn't for the whistleblower, we had a theory about what was going on. We had a theory that head office were aware. We had people telling us that head office were aware, but not until a whistleblower came forward and said from the inside, yes, this is happening, this is how it's happening, yes, they're aware, and yes, they're regretting not talking to you, all that kind of stuff like that. So whistleblowers are very, very important in this process. And as you can imagine, 7-Eleven are probably not a big fan of the whistleblower, despite they all love to encourage you to come forward and take advantage of their whistleblower policy. So anyway, Adele did a 4 corners, and the rest you probably know.
Thank you. And finally, we have the great Alan Fells, who was the distinguished former chairman of the ACCC. Professor Fells has worked with a number of whistleblowers during his time at the competition watchdog, including working on cartels. He's also continuing that connection with the fallout from 7-Eleven as chairman of the compensation panel, which came about because of some of the great work Michael has just told you about when he first stumbled across wage fraud. And then while I was doing 4 corners, we had sent a letter off to head office asking for an interview, and they made an announcement that there's about to be a hatchet job done. And one of the people listening to that ended up being a whistleblower. And he came forward with a lot of documents that really helped nail the fact that it went right up to the top, which was great. But in terms of Alan Fells, he's doing a great job on this compensation scheme, and I'd like to have you tell everyone how it's all going.
Okay, thanks very much, Adele, and I want to congratulate you and Michael and Jeff on their great contributions that are really making a difference. Yes, I'll say a few things about 7-Eleven and we'll get on to the ACCC because whistleblowers are critical there. With 7-Eleven, immediately, I was on the program and I was quite critical of 7-Eleven and especially of the fact that the profit sharing arrangement they had with franchisees meant that hardly any franchisees could run a profitable business unless they underpaid workers. So immediately after the program, I got a call from Russ Withers, who's the founder and chairman and everything of 7-Eleven, asking me if I would do an independent, if I'd run an independent panel, be supported by Deloitte's, who had no connection with 7-Eleven. There'd be no 7-Eleven staff involved, and we were there to repay the underpaid workers, and our decisions would be accepted by 7-Eleven without question, and they would pay out in full. Moreover, it was really obvious just from your program and hearing you also, Michael, that there's hardly any data about underpayments. There are some payroll records, but beyond that, there's virtually nothing. If you, as you, I think both mentioned to me, if you happen to investigate the last 2 weeks, there's CCTV, there are all sorts of bits of information, but they've long gone. So the test we have in assessing claims is whether it's reasonable in the circumstances to accept the claim and pay out. We've got in the locker, as it were, about 2,000 claims being assessed. It's fairly slow work, but we've paid out just about 300 so far, 343, and it's now reached 12 million. That's an average of about $35,000 per payout, with quite a wide distribution of individual numbers. I think 7-Eleven deserves some credit for taking this approach. They probably don't have any legal liability for the franchisees underpaying employees. They have said that they want to get some of the money, let's say in shorthand, about half the money back from the franchisees. That does give rise to our main problem, which is that many underpaid employees have not come forward at this stage. Initially, there was some lack of trust of the panel, the mere fact that it was set up by 7-Eleven. Trust is growing, the number of claims is increasing. We're doing everything we can to encourage people to come forward with claims. There has been a really strong franchisee campaign involving a good deal of intimidation, threats and so on to any current employees who come forward with a claim. And that has had a significant deterrent effect. Also, quite a few underpaid people are worried about the impact on their visa. The Department of Immigration and Border Protection has given some reasonable, not unconditional assurances, which has helped quite a lot on that matter. Now, just talking about this approach in general, I just want to emphasise that the fact that there is such a large payout, that amount dwarfs any of the puny fines available from action by the Fair Work Ombudsman. They're really negligible payouts, and they're by franchisees who may close down their business and reopen under another name to avoid those fines. But this almost precedent of the head office taking on the obligation to pay out and actually doing so, and I believe they are committed to this process. Of course, they're a bit equivocal here and there, but they're basically committed to payouts. They've paid out everything we've recommended. It's a far more powerful deterrent to others who may be engaged in this illegal behaviour, and there's every sign that this kind of behaviour is going on in many other businesses than it has with 7-Eleven. At 7-Eleven, even if you walk into the shop, you'll probably see there's been considerable improvement in compliance, but it's by no means free of underpayments, dodges, ways of avoiding responsibilities, new ways of underpaying people. So it's a slightly mixed picture.
So, Alan, just on the 7-Eleven, I guess what you're saying is they legally weren't bound to set up this compensation scheme, but from a brand reputation thing, they've paid out $12 million. They could be up for possibly $100 million. For a multi-million dollar company, that's not a lot, is it, when you think about the actual reputational damage of not doing this?
That's right. There are 650 stores in Australia. It's a very successful business. It's made a lot of profit over the years. I read in your excellent column, you suggested that the payout just on the 2,000 that we have in front of us before new people claim is 60 to 100 million. On the one hand, it could be more, could be a lot more. There are 20,000 plus employees who worked for 7-Eleven over the last 10 or 15 years. So it could total quite a lot in general. It's true that on one view of the world, what's 60 to 100 million for someone well off? On the other hand, 60 to 100 million is a lot, as I said, compared to the puny fines.
Yeah, so we really should have tougher legislation. But
Yes, I think, and that's a very good point. I think that as a start, there should be, maybe this, I can see you're going to ask me this anyway, there should be some legal obligation on the franchisor in this situation. Not total, because the franchisee is actively breaking the law. They shouldn't get off free, but I think there should be some legal burden on the franchisor, and the 7-Eleven case illustrates really well what you could do then.
Thank you. So just turning back to the role of whistleblowers. You were at the ACCC, you dealt with whistleblowers. In your opinion, are the laws generous enough? Are they protected in this country? Should we be doing more?
Well, I think I'd certainly say that whistleblowers are very poorly protected. They have a pretty tough time when they blow the whistle. Maybe there should be some additional protections. How can you protect not only their jobs and their income, but their family life, their ostracisation, and so on? Now, I do think there is quite a strong case for, in fact, I favour the law actually rewarding whistleblowers. I think there should be rewards. Such laws exist in the US, the UK, Singapore, a number of other countries. Probably a majority of countries don't. allow for rewards. There are various levels of sophistication about how you would do this, but the fact is that there's powerful disincentives for people to be whistleblowers, as Jeff would know, as the other whistleblowers we know about know. They just so often get the sack, and also they acquire a reputation which puts other employers off them. And yet their contribution is huge. They are the ones that enable people like Adele, enable the ACCC to actually make real progress. Now, in terms of other protections for whistleblowers, yes, let's have laws that prohibit retaliation against them and so on and so forth for what they are worth, for what they would do.
Thank you. Jeff, as a whistleblower, it's not something that you've really discussed before, but, you know, and just go as far as you want, but what was the personal cost to you of blowing the whistle?
Well, the personal cost is such that under the current system, it's just not really a rational choice that you could defend on grounds of reason. I remember the evening I told my wife what I was going to have to do, and she was distraught and pleaded with me not to do it because she said the bank will destroy you. And look, they've given it a pretty fair shot over the years. I reached my nadir, I guess, when I was diagnosed with PTSD. That was just after my wife left the home with the two children. They were aged 2 and 4 when their reckless father made this decision. And they're 9 and 11 now. They haven't had the childhood that I would have liked for them. So the personal cost is immense, and interestingly, Dr. Ben Coe, the Comensure whistleblower, he's one of many people who's contacted me, and indeed one of many people who's contacted me about the Commonwealth Bank and wanted to blow the whistle there. Now, most of them don't. Russell Phillips was a brave man who blew the whistle on the fraudulent compensation scheme last year, and for his pains he was shamefully vilified by the CBA. But I was talking to Dr. Ben Coe for many months before he left Comensure, and he told me about what was going on, and as a doctor he had this ethical conflict, and it wasn't as if I could paint this rosy picture for him, but I said it's not actually a choice. It's not something you choose to do, it's something you have to do. And I said to him, I've got nothing to offer you but, blood, toil, tears and sweat. And all I can do is rely on your sense of ethics as a doctor and as a man and as a human being to do the right thing. And he couldn't escape from that in the end. So in full knowledge of what this was likely to cost him, he took the plunge. But personally, I don't think it should be that way. And I also think that if we had a system of a proper system to protect and just compensate whistleblowers, not reward them, I know from the number of people who've contacted me and can't go through with it because of the cost, there'd be a lot more whistleblowers. And if you want to stamp out corruption, that would be the quickest and most efficient way to deal with it.
Jeff, do you regret being a whistleblower?
Well, no, I don't. I pretty much had a fair idea what I'd be in for. I don't. I just felt it was something, well, you can't walk away from this. And I guess I knew if I did walk away from it, I just wouldn't be able to look myself in the mirror every morning, knowing that I'd run away from something. And there's a lot more victims at CBA than have come to light yet. There's many thousands, 20,000 registered for that scheme. I actually think the true toll, and this would come out in a Royal Commission, is tens of thousands more victims. And I think the compensation that is probably due, this is just to the financial planning victims. I put it in my Senate submission, I would estimate it at 500 million, possibly as high as $1 billion. Now, they've paid out a couple of million so far with the compensation scheme they're running themselves. They paid out 50 million sometime before that. It's really a drop in the ocean, and these are people whose lives have been ruined. So you can't really walk past that. And it's funny, 20 years ago I was having a discussion with a colleague and we were talking about the financial planning industry, and we agreed that somebody ought to do something about cleaning up that bunch of scallywags. And 20 years later it was me. And so we're always saying somebody ought to do something about that. It comes as a real shock when you realise that somebody's going to be you.
Thanks. And Michael, you're a whistleblower of sorts. You're a consumer advocate, but in terms of 7-Eleven, you weren't an internal whistleblower, but you saw wrongdoing and you went to the company and then came to the media. What is it that motivates you? What drives you?
This is an emotional...
There must be easier jobs.
I struggle to say this without getting a tear in my eye, but the way I describe it is if you see an elderly person drop their purse on the ground, you'd pick it up. I didn't see a purse. I saw people being underpaid. I had to do something.
And you keep going. But what is it that drives you? Is it a moral obligation to do that? Does it make you feel good?
Well, it's funny because in a way it feels like a selfish thing because it makes me happy. Like the people say to me, "Thank you for helping me," but I think I'm the one who won. I got the good feeling to see. I had a family the other day buy a $500,000 house with the settlement that we got, and they rang me up and said we're moving in.
And did you get paid by anyone for 7-Eleven?
No.
So you did it purely for altruistic reasons?
Yeah, and because 7-Eleven was sort of spreading a bit of a rumour that that's what I was in it for, I made a public statement to say, no, I wouldn't take any money, and everyone constantly getting lectured, say, you've got to look at getting paid for yourself, but I just don't, when you're trying to help people, I don't think the help should start with, and my fee is, when they're desperate. And normally there's a lot of people out there claiming to be advocates, wanting to help, but they're there for other purposes, and for me it's about helping people. It makes me happy and I feel fulfilled.
And Alan, you would have come across a number of whistleblowers through the years. Is there a common trait, do you think, with whistleblowers?
Yes, usually they are exceptional individuals. They have some commitment or some conscience. Sometimes they are sort of a little bit at the extreme. I always remember George Bernard Shaw, the reasonable person adapts to society. All change, therefore, depends on people being unreasonable. So many whistleblowers sort of go out, and indeed, although they've been really fundamental to the ACCC uncovering numerous cartels, when I started the first 4 or 5 big ones, they were the first really big ones ever, they were all the result of whistleblowing. Sometimes big, sometimes just enough to give us the clues how to investigate in depth. They make a huge difference. I wanted to just mention at some point the other category of whistleblowers that has been brought about by leniency policies. Now, in the old days, I'd give a talk to business, I'd say, well, if you own up, we'll go a bit easy on you, and they didn't really accept that. So we, inspired by the US had similar experience, we decided to introduce rigid rules. If someone came to us and owned up, then they got off, unless they were the ringleader, and their competitors paid fines, they got off. Some people are a bit shocked at you let off someone who's broken the law. But it's proved to be a very powerful way of breaking up cartels. The essence of cartels is secrecy. And that's the key way of getting, that's the only way it can get at them. Now, one other just brief thing. Many of you will probably think, well, all right, maybe they should be let off. But what about damages? So supposing the person who owns up has caused damage, taken money off someone, supposing I've robbed someone and I go to the ACCC. Now, you will find, I've always had mixed feelings about it, the ACCC doesn't do very much to help with damages, and the very difficult calculus is that if firms who own up know that, well, they're getting off a fine but they're copping a huge damages bill, they're not likely to come forward. So on the whole, it's been more important in the ACCC view to break up the harmful cartels, even if they don't do a 100% job on compensation to the original victims.
Okay. And now I'm going to open up to the floor if you'd like to ask any questions of any of us.
Thank you very much to the panel. I was interested to hear the reference to Slater and Gordon. Their catchphrase is Slater and Gordon, not a problem, and of course that doesn't apply if you're a shareholder of Slater and Gordon at present. I very much identify with trying to get people to listen and they won't listen. On the 5th of July 2012, I attended a meeting with the then Assistant Treasurer and Minister for Superannuation and the heads of ASIC and APRA to give a submission in relation to the Trio Capital scandal. Do you recall what that was? The largest superannuation fraud in Australian history, $175 million of investors' money sent to offshore tax havens. I delivered a 20-odd page submission to those worthy gentlemen, which included reference to failures to adequately review AUSTRAC information and failures to take notice of the fact that the Trio Capital scammers had actually defrauded the tax office a few years before and were known to authorities. And I've written to the Trio Capital Parliamentary Committee, the ANAO, the Ombudsman, and a whole raft of agencies trying to bring attention to those things, and I may as well have been talking to a brick wall. If anyone is interested in talking to me about how we could have nipped that fraud in the bud, I'm happy to do so. I tried to talk to the opposition leader outside the ABC a couple of weeks ago, and instead of coming out the front door to the Z car, he disappeared out the back door. So you might ask him about that next time you see him. If anyone wants to talk to me, please come and see me.
Okay, can people identify themselves when they ask a question? Thanks. Okay. Next question.
Hi, my name's Naomi Halpin, and first of all, I would really like to thank our whistleblowers on the panel. As far as I'm concerned, as a victim of financial fraud and misconduct, and representing a victims group of many hundreds of people, we really need whistleblowers, and I strongly support the need for whistleblower protection and also reward. And also, Adele, for you, to thank you for the amazing work that you've done over the years in exposing corporate corruption. You have really done a tremendous amount to give hope to victims of these kinds of crimes, that it's not going to be just kept on being swept under the carpet.
Thank you.
My question is to Jeff. Jeff, I read in The Australian this morning that the ASIC chairman, Greg Medcraft, is seeking an extension of his contract. I'd like to ask, is that a slap in the face for all of the victims of the financial scandals that have happened on his watch?
Yes.
Thank you. Frank Boris is my name. Thank you, everyone up there, for their bravery and commitment to a cause very close to my heart. It seems many corporates have glossy ethical standards, yet behind the doors it's nothing but a hologram. I've been an advocate for fair wages in the cleaning industry for over 20 years, yet 90% of the industry nationally still don't pay award wages or entitlements. It's a well-known fact, with weekly prosecutions by Fair Work. Natalie James has openly commented Fair Work will now pursue boards and supply chains, yet we haven't seen one prosecution to date. What additional powers do you believe Fair Work require, and why are the states and federal government not doing anything when there's clear exploitation and they're missing out on payroll tax and tax revenue?
Well, there's a few questions there. I think we need much stronger penalties. The penalties are ridiculously low. There's no deterrence there. I think we need to be implicating... I think the accessorial legislation is too tough, and so you've got 7-Eleven, which has agreed to do the right thing, but most companies aren't doing that because they perhaps haven't been exposed so shamefully as 7-Eleven. Why isn't the government or the opposition doing much on this? I don't know. There's 1.3 million foreign workers in this country on visas. Many of them are being exploited. I think it's become part of the economic fabric. I think there's a lot of small businesses that wouldn't be able to run without cheap labour, so maybe that's the issue.
So I'll just repeat again, part of the answer, all those things, and certainly part of the answer is making the franchisor more liable legally.
Mark Forbes from The Age. I think if Joe Aston spent a bit more time listening to whistleblowers rather than corporate flacks, he'd have a more interesting column. If I could ask Professor Fells, I mean, given the sorts of your experience and the stories we've heard recounted today, do you think that ASIC is actually capable to both police and prevent the sort of illegal and immoral transgressions by our banks and other major corporations?
I've followed them pretty closely since I started at the Trade Practices Commission in 1991, and basically they don't have a strong culture of law enforcement. It's improved a bit lately, but they've still got an awful long way to go. What you need is an agency which has an unconditional commitment to uphold the law without fear or favour to the most powerful people, to be courageous about undertaking litigation, not being cautious, not seeking the outlet of enforceable undertakings when there's a serious breach of the law. If Parliament passes a law outlawing something, then the job of the regulator is to get the sanctions applied in important cases. Enforceable undertakings occasionally have some role. Incidentally, they were brought in for another purpose. They were to help a technical problem we were having with mergers, that you got promises before a merger that might get broken and couldn't be enforced. So it's quite useful to have an enforceable promise from a firm that if they break it, you can go to court. But this spread of it into the application of the law is quite difficult. Now, another point about ASIC is that historically it's had two roles. One of them is facilitating business, registering, all that stuff. And that, in my view, has compromised its enforcement mentality. Half the time it may be helping business, then the other time's got this enforcement role. So I would certainly separate and I'd put into a different part of government all the registration of business and so on, and give them an enforcement role. It is, to be fair to ASIC, fairly hard going, applying some of that corporate law. It's marginally easier in competitional, but it is the culture that has been lacking for many years, starting to improve, but a long way to go.
Chris Murphy from Power Shop Australia. I was going to start by saying I had nothing to do with whistleblowing. I've never been a whistleblower, never had a need to blow, and I've never really been a victim of it, until Mark asked his question. And I remember now that I got invited to a pub once by Mark to come and become a whistleblower. Unfortunately, I didn't want to blow the whistle, and I didn't have a whistle to blow because in the circumstances, but I do recall now it was actually a challenging conversation to have. Notwithstanding I had nothing to say, the thought of having to be a whistleblower was challenging. And I really have to thank our guests. Standing up for something is bloody hard. Standing up for something, knowing you're going to get probably nowhere, must be really hard. And Professor Svell spoke of the unreasonable people who make society change. Thank God for the unreasonable people up on the stage. Yeah, you may have been complete idiots to have done what you've done and destroyed lots of parts of your lives, but you've made Australia better, and we thank you for it. And we talk about compensation. So my question is this. I don't think anybody, Jeff, Michael, or any of the whistleblowers, got up to blow the whistle for reasons of compensation or for reward. The reward they wanted was to stop what was happening, to fix something. And the best way to reward a whistleblower, in my mind, is to make it easy for their whistleblowing to be rewarded by the reward they wanted. Stop the behaviour. And to that extent, the worst corruption is not Commonwealth Bank or 7-Eleven, who are corrupt and outrageous and should not have happened. The worst corruption is when someone blows the whistle and they're ignored. Because when that happens, it sends a signal that don't bother. And it's already hard enough. It's actually almost impossible. If we then make it even harder and say you've got to work for 3 years to keep banging your head against the wall to get an outcome, who here is going to say, well, I'll just do what Jeff did, because that looked like a sensible thing? Whereas every time there's a whistleblower who is rewarded by quick action, effective action, I might change my mind and say, you know what, that didn't seem so bad. Let's do that. So if we want to encourage whistleblowing, we want to stop the problems we're talking about, the best and most important change we can make, in my mind, is making the regulators effective. And when the gamekeeper turns poacher, when they become worse, just lazy and ineffective, we have a real problem. And I also know what we can do to make the regulators more effective. I'll take the alternative view, ACCC. The most reassuring thing that I saw in the ACCC was, weirdly, Jeff Kennett's complaint about bread, which I know Professor Fell's got involved in as well. I assume when I see crap like that in the supermarket that if I complain to ACCC, nothing will happen. The fact that Jeff got some response was great. But my question is, if it wasn't Jeff Kennett, would he have got the same response? And so how do we make the regulators responsive to whistleblowers so that whistleblowers keep blowing the whistle and not putting them back in their pocket?
Yeah, good question. We've got time for one more question.
Thanks. John Beryl, lawyer. This is to you, Alan. Do you think we need a discrete, independent personal body to deal with whistleblowers, a whistleblower ombudsman, if you like, to act as a safe haven for people such as Jeff and Michael to go to? Or do you think the ACCC and the ASIC are able to deal with this adequately?
Well, I suppose I'm defensive, although I haven't been there for 10 years, but I think the ACCC has been fairly reasonable on whistleblowers. They're delighted to get them. And they have acted on more than Jeff Kennett. They've acted on lots of whistleblowers. In fact, I was going to make the other point that I agree with you. There's nothing as bad as a whistleblower coming forward and being neglected. The other side of it is that if you and your organisation react to a few whistleblowers, more get encouraged to come forward. That's really big. And just flippantly talking about Adele, she deserves to be able to sit comfortably in her chair for quite a few years after all the work she's been doing. But she won't be able to because now people have such confidence in her that they will come to her with more revelations, knowing something will happen. Regarding the Ombudsman, I think maybe there is something to be said for that. A better safeguard, but the Ombudsman, it's not just a matter of the Ombudsman kind of seeing that something comes from whistleblowing. They've got to check on a million things about the penalties within the business to a whistleblower.
Thank you, Alan. I'd like to thank everybody for such great support coming today, and particularly thank Jeff Morris, Michael Fraser, and Professor Alan Fells. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.